I don't like to break into your conversation, but I'm told that I'm supposed to welcome you, so I will. I'm John Eby. I'm currently chair of the board of Landis Homes, and for a week and 2 days, a resident. And I thought for a while, that I had the honor of being the first third-generation resident. My grandparents were here, my parents were here, but I found out that the honor really belongs to Mary Book, who you would know as Mary Bumberger. Her grandmother was here, and there may also be others, but it is kind of intriguing that there are third-generation people that are now becoming part of Landis Homes. Welcome. It's really good to have you here. We've had so many events celebrating the 50th anniversary, and this, of course, is one of those. Many of you have heard me say before that my first job was with the Eastern Mennonite, my first real job, was with the Eastern Mennonite Board of Missions, as it was called then, in the Voluntary Service Office, and I joined the staff in the summer of 1962, after I graduated from college. And so one of the conversations that I was not part of, but that was going on beside me, was a conversation among Ira Buckwalter and Ori Miller and Frank Ank and others about the possibility of starting what eventually has become Landis Homes. And so I've watched it develop, and it's intriguing now to be part of it. One of the things that really strikes me about a project like this, and looking around the group and seeing those of you I know, which is most of you, this project is a project that grows out of community. It's not something that happens alone. It certainly took the vision of people like Ira Buckwalter and Ori Miller and others, but it could not have happened without the involvement, without the wisdom, without the insight, the creativity, the support of a whole range of different people. And I thought about it today over in my building. I was looking out and seeing all the trucks of the different people who are building the newest hybrid, each one with their own skill, their own gift, and when it's all put together, it becomes a marvelous whole. And so I hope all of you can feel a sense of satisfaction, a sense of joy by being part of that community which has made Landis Homes happen. So we invite you to share together, to enjoy the food, and then there'll be a presentation a bit later. Let's begin with prayer. Our God, we do thank you for the joy of being together. We thank you for the gifts that you have given each one in this room. And we thank you for calling us to use our gifts to build your kingdom, and to make your world a better place, here in this community and in all the other communities that we represent around the local communities, other communities in the United States, and as we touch people around the world. We thank you today for giving us food. We pray that you will use our conversation to bring joy, meaning to each of us. And we thank you for being part of our conversation, for being the founder and through Jesus the head of the church within which we find joy and meaning. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So enjoy the food and fellowship, and then Larry will introduce the rest of the program later.
Beginning the program in about 5 minutes.
Group of old men, somehow, I don't know why, but in 1962, my father was 54 years old, and I was 24, and I think, Norman, if I'm correct, you were probably about 30 at that time. So that's how things change as the years go by. My father was treasurer of the mission board since 1947, and then that's how he got involved in the project here in terms of looking concerning a retirement home. In those years, Miriam and I were living in New York City, and we came home on weekends occasionally, and we split the time between my home in Intercourse and her home in Akron. But I remember Sunday afternoons sitting in the backyard on a summer day, and my father would tell me about what's happening in his life, and I would tell him about what's happening in my life. And I remember him telling me about the mission board getting started with planning for a retirement home. And he talked about all the different sites that were being looked at, and one at Willis Street and one next to LMH and other places. And they were really trying to sort that out with a lot of meetings and discussions. And then I remember him telling me about the fact that they narrowed it down to this site on Oregon Road near Landis Valley. And he said the committee pulled their cars into the alfalfa field. Can you picture this whole campus being an alfalfa field with not one single brick in this area? And so they pulled their cars in, and the committee walked up and down on the alfalfa field talking about where on earth on this big field would we start to build. This was after this site was chosen. And then again, they did the same thing again with an engineer, a site planner, and then eventually they chose the lower end to start with the first building. And when the township they went to the township for various permits and, of course, to building and industry later on and so on. But a lot of engineers and different organizations got wind of this project through the township, I suppose, and they got a lot of calls to come and help. I mean, a lot of organizations wanted to get involved in the planning process. Well, as they continued working at it, the committee decided to get involved with Abram Horst, and Abe's son Clyde got involved at that point. He was getting more and more involved with his father in the contracting business, and Clyde was having some training as an architect. And so I first learned to know Clyde when I was about 10 years old. My dad used to take me with him to various appointments with Abe because my dad was chairman of the property committee for the board, and there was all kinds of building projects up and down the East Coast, and some of them nearby he involved Abe. So one day he took me with him to New Holland when he went to visit Abe, and Clyde and I sat on a little swing set in the backyard. We were both 10 or 11 years old, and that's how we learned to know each other. And then we were high school buddies later on. But Abe Horst and Clyde really stood by the committee and really worked hard at helping to get everything off the ground here. And my father always spoke very highly of the Horst family and their involvement. Clyde personally walked a lot of the applications through labor and industry in Harrisburg and helped with many other local approval venues. So I know my father always spoke appreciatively of his other committee members, the founders. I don't think they called themselves founders at that point. We call them founders looking back. But it was the committee working at getting it approved. And he also often spoke with appreciation about his partners at Salunga, at the mission board office, and especially with Norman Shank here being involved with my father in the mission board financial part of things. So thanks for being here.
When Landis Homes was started, I was living in another state. I was having babies, so I don't remember a lot about the beginning of Landis Homes. However, since it seems I was selected to speak for my siblings, especially my sisters, I made contact with them and will share what they told me. My sister Mary was married and was living in Virginia. But she remembered that Papa, that is what we called our father, was very concerned about elderly people who needed assistance. She remembers his concern about Grandma Ank and her living conditions. She finally went and lived with my Aunt Mamie Becker. On the Thomas side, Aunt Anna took care of Grandma and Grandpa Thomas, but the time came that she needed care. In those days, the Mennonite home was not most desirable. Papa believed that there should be a pleasant place for retirement living, not just a nursing home. Mary says, certainly the location of Landis Home contribute to having a place in the country like the atmosphere and to provide a decent place for persons to retire to before they needed complete care. This leads me to my sis, Mim, who was the youngest of the family. She was a teenager at the time, and she remembers Papa and her going to look at the cornfield. And she asked, why do they want to build a retirement home in the middle of a cornfield? She said he had a vision of what would become of that cornfield. She remembers going to the dedication service with Papa, and at that time she thought, what a great place for older people to live. Now, there was no issue of after my father died that my mother would come to Landis Home, and she lived here 27 years. She died at the age of 99.
My claim to fame is that Dad was on the executive committee of Eastern Mennonite Missions, and I had the privilege of working with Ira Buckwalder in the finance office. Ori Miller was a very creative person. He helped as charter member of more than a dozen different agencies, the largest of which, of course, was MCC, Mennonite Central Committee. But he was also at the same time secretary of Eastern Mennonite Board of Missions and Charities. He, along with Ira Buckwalder, suggested to the executive that we consider taking care of our long-term mission workers, both in overseas and in stateside urban ministries. And so the whole vision for Landis Homes gradually took shape. EMM was facing the fact that some of our longer-term overseas people would soon be reaching retirement age. All of the EMM staff, as well as home and overseas workers, were supported on a cost of living basis, which did not include a savings factor for any future retirement needs. Eastern Mennonite Missions authorized staff and the executive committee to study and plan for the future well-being of their workers. The mission board appointed an advisory board to choose and recommend a location. The search began for a suitable location. A donor was found who helped give some startup funds. Larry referred to this. After looking at zoning and dozens of potential locations, the advisory board brought this location and the potential terms of a contract to the mission board for approval. Now, they did look at dozens of other prospective sites, and people like Charles Good and Clarence Harnish were kind of hoping we'd settle on a Shank farm in the Strasburg area. But the majority of opinion was that we should take seriously the opportunity here at this location. We had this farm offered on a donation basis in exchange for a lifetime unit trust. That is, if Eastern Mennonite Missions would give a trust agreement that the donors would have an income for life, and their two single sisters who lived in the cottage could have a life right of occupancy. And to create that kind of trust document, I was the one who was doing the simple annuities in those days for Eastern Mennonite Missions. But I called on John Rudy and the expertise of the Mennonite Foundation to help so we would get this one right. And we wrote a unit trust that provided a monthly income for the donors and assured the existing access to the existing cottage on the farm or similar living space and facilities that would later be built for the two Landis sisters. This concern for worker well-being brought us to this location with the first facilities ready for occupancy 1964, and by July 1965, the Mission Board also began making deposits to Mennonite Retirement Trust for all their long-term workers so that some savings could accumulate toward future retirement needs. This included a provision for earlier workers like the Stauffers, who went to Africa in 1934 and already had 30 years of tenure before any pension deposits were made to Mennonite Retirement Trust. Therefore, it feels good to me to see a board that tries to honor the original goal and purpose to provide for mission and church workers, and a staff here that continues to be well cared for in a very good way by this board. Thank you.
My name is Ed Longenecker, and having served here for about 30 years. And I came to Landis Homes when Landis Homes was a teenager, 13 years old. And I felt like a teenager. I was 35. And Larry asked me to comment a bit about Sanford High. It's unfortunate we don't have anybody from the High family here, but I remember Sanford High as being a very successful businessman. Of course, all of you know about High Associates. And so when I came to the board meeting and began work here, it was a good experience meeting some of the founding fathers who were still on the board at that time. My first experience with Sanford was a trip to the Protestant Health and Welfare meeting in Philadelphia. And it was interesting that Landis Homes was very concerned about finding good advice from not just the board, but going beyond to see what others are saying in other organizations. And so the Mennonite Health Association, as it was called at that time, now it's Mennonite Health Services, or MHS, was participating in the Protestant Health and Welfare, and so Sanford and I had a chance to go. In fact, I don't remember a whole lot about that meeting, other than to tell you that I was somewhat intimidated by being with Sanford because of all of his accomplishments and for the very little that I had accomplished at that point. And yet, I'm sure that as much as I was intimidated by him, he was unsure of who I was. But one thing did set the tenure for our time together there at that meeting. We shared a hotel room. And when it came time to go to bed, Sanford knelt by the bed to have his evening prayer. And I said, well, that's what my dad does. And so I felt at home with Sanford. Larry was kind enough to give to me a report that Sanford, Frank Ank, Mallory Fry, and the other person was John Winters, who was living in Florida. They traveled to Florida to see what other homes were like in that area. And so they were doing their homework. This was in 1962. And this report was written very interestingly. It talked about the courtyards, and it talked about the glass corridors, and it talked about the layout, seeing residents fully involved in activities. And so it's not surprising to me that Landis Homes, with its courtyards and glass corridors and its activities, didn't have its early roots in that sort of visit. I'm sure there were many other visits to other places as well in the local area, but it was interesting to see that theme come through. One other comment I'll make, Larry, about Ori Miller. I had the privilege to work here at Landis Homes, of course, with Ira Buckwalter, and Ori Miller made the comment either to Ira or to George Lehman, my predecessor. He would say, well, when we build, let's not build Cadillacs or homes that are very expensive. He said, you know, you may change your mind at some point or another. It reminded me, Larry, with your strategic planning. Just last week you met with residents to talk about the fact that we're going to now take down some cottages that were built early on, and we're going to repurpose this area and change it to something new. And so this would have fit with Ori Miller's interest in having not set yourself in concrete so that you don't have room to repurpose or do new things. And so I was just impressed by the forethought of our early board members and how they took interest in making sure that they did something, and they did it well and started out well, and they continued to work at making improvements. I want to add another note, and that is that Rhoda, my wife, is a nurse, and she helped to take care of Irma in healthcare when she needed those services later in her years. Sanford didn't live as long as she did, and she lived here quite beyond, I guess, his death, and for many years. And if you come in today into the entrance of Dogwood, the business office, you'll see a plaque which said Sanford and Irma High donated funds for this entrance. And so it's good to see that. Now I'll look at my notes, see if I missed anything. One of the things I'll say real quickly is that we talk about founding fathers, we talk about an active board these days. The difference between a first generation and a second generation board, there's a board that has a vision, and then there's the board that has the responsibility for the ongoing operation. And so the board, first generation board, high level of trust, give the work to the staff and let them run with it. The next generation asks the question, well, why are we doing this? But that's very important, because you must continue to do those sorts of strategic thinking to make sure we're going in the right direction. So we're glad we have second generation board, Larry.
Thank you so very much, Ed, Norman, Ann, and John. Let's give them a hand for sharing memories. I'm so grateful for those memories, and one of the reasons we're meeting in this room, we don't usually have round tables and have dining service in this room, but one of the reasons is that we have good video cameras that we can record these memories. And so that was one of the things that was happening here this afternoon. Ed Longenecker, when we chatted a little bit earlier this morning, said that, yeah, you know, the reason why we bought chairs instead of putting benches in West Bethany Chapel, and he mentioned that Ira Buckwalter had an important say in that, was that we could do this kind of thing. that we could move the chairs and to set up this space. So that was an example of foresight as well. We could hear stories from others of the founders. I just was standing in line with Deborah Landis, who I believe as a teenager was recruited by her father, Lester, to help serve refreshments at one of the opening events here at Landis Homes. And so I'm hoping that those stories have been shared around tables here and will set the stage for the 50 years in our future. Norman mentioned that we were created to serve retired missionaries and church workers, and just recently we checked with the mission board to see their alumni list, and over 100 EMM alumni and well over 40 Lancaster Mennonite Conference pastors and spouses are residents here at Landis Homes. So that mission is continuing. That's in addition to missionaries and pastors from many other denominations and also church workers from other organizations as well. I do want to name each of the 10 founders. Levi Brubaker, Ira Buckwalter, Frank Ank, J. Mallory Fry, Charles Good, Clarence Harnish, Sanford High, Adam Martin, and Lester Wanger, the 10 founders. And each of their spouses as well, I have a feeling, played a role. We heard a little bit about that from Martha, who came along with Adam, partly to drive home because Adam would get pretty sleepy on the way home, and Martha wanted to make sure that the Adam stayed awake or that they got home safely to Morgansville, Maryland. So we're grateful to all. I want to, before we go to the next part of the program, just also mention sincere appreciation for all former board members who have been serving here, some serving back in the 70s, 80s, into the current decade, the 90s and the current decade as well, along with the current board members who are here. We're grateful for your service and very much appreciate that. While none of the founders are currently living, we do have a videotape of one, Charles Good, and we have a tape of A. Grace Wanger, who wrote the history of the first 30 years of Landis Homes, speaking about God at work here at Landis Homes. So Chris will be sharing that video. Well, hello, it is good to be together here with Charles Good, who has known and understood the history here at Landis Homes for over 45 years, since prior to the beginning of Landis Homes. And so, Charles, we just look forward to hearing some stories about how you have seen God at work here at Landis Homes, and whatever you would like to share.
Well, in those early days, there was no home, and we had no experience in retirement homes. So how were we supposed to proceed? That was one of the big questions. And Levi Brubaker was a very instrumental man on the board at that time to guide the board, to see and know the things that were essential for a retirement home. And like I said, we had no experience with retirement homes. There was a group of us went out to Goshen and got some information at Goshen, and some college students put on a drama for us to get an impression of what it'll be like once we have old people coming back and coming into this home and retiring. So from from that experience, we went from there to try to develop this home. And I don't really know what I should say as an experience in that time, We of course went step by step into the unknown. We didn't really know what we were heading into, but the Lord led the way, and we found our way as days and years multiplied. So it's much to emphasize that the Lord led the way, that we didn't know. We were like Samuel said, we didn't go this way before, and so we had to find the way, and which we did. That is, the people who worked with us here, and the Lord gave direction, and we found the way, so that we are where we are today. And we praise the Lord for the development of this home, because this home has really developed in these 45 years. There was that day when I remember that they talked about how much interest we can pay here. And they talked about establishing a price for the farm at $50,000 at 6%. And there was no income. How was it supposed to be gathered together? But it worked. It did. And it never was a burden. Our interest money seemed like very small potatoes after we got going. But of course, everything has to have a beginning, and it has to have direction. And so that's how it went for us. We found direction as we went on. You know, in any experience in life, whether it's like this home or whether it's our own personal life and development, we have to depend on the Lord to open the door. And that's what happened here. That many of the steps that we needed to take were unknown to us. And so we had to depend on the almighty arm of God to guide us right, for which we're very thankful. And of course, it wasn't without mistakes either. We were very conscious that we're very human and that we don't see far into the future. But when we depend on the Lord, He leads the way and opens the door and closes doors. And so we're very happy for that as we look back and understand what the Lord did to develop this home.
Well, it's very good being together here with Grace Wanger, resident here at Landis Homes and author, a very special author because you wrote the book about the first 30 years of Landis Homes. And now, 45 years after the beginning, we welcome hearing from you any stories you would like to share about how you have seen God at work here at Landis Homes?
I think I have seen God at work in the physical growth of the institution. 45 years ago, there was Aspen and the 4 cottages just across from Aspen. And when Emma Rudy first arrived, she said, I saw those small buildings and wondered if this could ever be a retirement home. And Grable Landis, who donated the $100,000 that got things started, said, those walls will never stand, but they are still standing, and the place has grown tremendously and is still growing. Another thing that has happened, I think, has been a growth of confidence in this type of facility. After it had been, the home had been open for about a month and a half, there were 6 residents in Aspen and 2 in one of the cottages. And Ori Miller said, this type of retirement living is new to Mennonites. If Mennonites won't come, we'll open it to other people. And confidence has grown not only among Mennonites, but among people of every denomination. And I think that has enriched the place. And the thing that I feel most positive about is the way people's needs have been met exactly where they are. And there I'm going to talk about my Aunt Katie. Aunt Katie was my mother's youngest sister who lived with us. And after her retirement, she spent most of her time talking with Mother, doing little things about the house, but visiting with Mother. And when Mother died suddenly, she became deeply depressed and announced that she wanted to go to Philhaven. We really didn't know what to do, but we contacted the only other niece that was in the country, one was in Africa, and told her the problem. Aunt Katie is depressed. She thinks she wants to go to Philhaven. Elta was the wife of Ori Miller. So Ori and Elta came, picked up Aunt Katie, and Ori convinced her that perhaps she just needed a change of scenery. Maybe she should try Landis Homes instead of Philhaven. So they brought her to Landis Homes. She picked room 13 in Aspen. This was in April of the 2nd year of Landis Homes. Moved in on Good Friday and immediately began to call us wanting to come home again. Of course, we knew that was the wrong thing because she would be alone again and have time to feel depressed and miss Mother. So we told her we think it would be better for her to stay. Someone from our family visited her every Sunday afternoon, and at first it was very difficult because she kept begging me to come home. She offered another niece $100 if she would take her home. Her Sunday school teacher took her to church and invited her for dinner, and she said, I could live here with you. This continued for several months, and then we began to hear positive statements. Grace Lehman did this for her. Eva Martin did this for her. Staff members. Curtis Johnson was so helpful. Other residents, Barbara Rice, Lizzie Momal, Margie Books. Things became more and more positive until by November, we could take her home for Thanksgiving dinner. And we thought the battle had really been won when, after she had been there for a Sunday dinner, late in the afternoon she said, well, I think it's about time for me to go home. And to know that Landis Homes had become home to her was a real victory. Seeing the atmosphere of Landis Homes, my sisters and I decided that when we retired, that this would be the place we would come. We came, I think it was 22 years ago, and have never regretted it since then. And that's how I think God is working here.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you so very much for sharing that very special story.
You're very welcome. And I'm sure it has happened to many other people here too. Their needs are met where they are. And it's not only staff, but staff and residents.
Yes.
Everything works together.
And I see so many persons, yourself included, serving other residents.
Right.
You deliver mail, you do a variety of things that help brighten the day of others.
Teach Sunday school
Teach
lessons
Sunday school
sometimes.
lessons.
Coming up this week, and it wasn't an easy one to teach.
Well, thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Grace. That you enjoyed hearing those vignettes of memories, and maybe could identify, have you ever taught a hard Sunday school lesson? Like Grace just said, it wasn't an easy one to teach. That was one of the many volunteer things that she had done. Looking back, looking forward, we're going to do a little bit of, today is Thursday, we're going to do a little bit of Throwback Thursday. From a cornfield to 634 health care and personal care rooms, apartments, suites, and cottages in residential living, which people call home. From a beginning with Henry and Mary Weber, pictured here in the black and white photo as third and fourth persons from the right, who moved to Landis Homes in February '64, to about 800 residents and clients today. From one dining room where residents and staff ate together, to multiple dining areas, some offering food to residents and team members 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. From being called to dinner by a dinner bell, to being able to eat meals at any time desired. From buildings called A, B, and C, do you remember that? Unit A, B, C? To streets, to households, and communities. From George and Grace Lehman and a couple of other early staff members, to now 540 staff team members and 450 volunteer team members. That's almost 1,000. From nursing uniforms and hats to brightly colored clothing and personal expressions of style. From typewriters, call bells, lights, and intercoms, to a phone system with more than 200 team member users and a computer network serving 250 staff computers and over 200 residents. From paper files to electronic medical records. From an original concept drawing, likely this done by Clyde Horst, designed to appeal to very specific people, to being listed in 2013 by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services as one of 10 providers of health care nationwide, that's out of about 16,000, being honored for high level of care and high performance. A lot has changed during our 50 years. There are also changes to those we serve over the past 50 years. We began by serving only those who were residents at Landis Homes. 25 years ago, in 1989, we began serving the broader community by opening our first adult day services. This was followed in 2007 by the creation of Landis at Home, bringing care to people on the Landis Homes campus, as well as within a 15-mile radius from Landis Homes. We have even expanded services to younger generations through the creation of the Children's Learning Center in 2004. Growth and change continued in 2011 as the Landis Homes Board created Landis Communities, and since then, in 2013, as Welsh Mountain Home, which is about 90 years old, has affiliated with Landis Homes, and in 2013, the creation of Steepleview Lofts in an active and vibrant downtown Lancaster. It is fun to look back on things that have changed in the past 50 years, but 2014 is also providing us a great way to do not only that, but also to focus on things that have not changed. These things that have not changed, I would suggest, are the things keeping Landis Homes true to our mission and the things that are keeping us grounded in who we are. One thing that has remained the same is the dedication of the supporters of Landis Homes, many strong supporters in this room. Going back to the very first chicken barbecue fundraiser over 40 years ago to the current large tent filled with supporters each September for Fellowship Day, volunteers have been key to the growth of the community at Landis Homes. You may not be aware that this year, which is I believe our 16th auction as part of Fellowship Day, we likely will cross the $1 million mark of funds raised through the benefit auction at Landis Homes. We're grateful for that support for the Caring Fund. Volunteers make their mark at Landis Homes every day. In 2013, over 35,000 volunteer hours were given on campus, with residents giving nearly another 13,000 hours off campus. Residents and supporters together making a huge difference for people here at Landis Homes. Another constant has been the work of team members. From the early days through today, they are hardworking, committed to the mission, and very willing to serve all who they come in contact with, even if it means taking a little extra time during their days. And though we have not always named our guiding values, I believe our values were firmly in place from before we opened our doors and welcomed our first residents. I'm reminded that Ori Miller, in one of the first meetings, asked the question, for what is God giving us these additional years of life? And he answered that question, certainly for a purpose, and youth and old age together should find ways to make these extended years meaningful. Our guiding values are joy, compassion, integrity, stewardship, and community. Coming to present and looking to the future, over the years we've been blessed to have a very strong board of directors, and those gathered here could remember different times of strategic planning and different times over the years that have led to tangible changes here on campus. We are committed to keeping Landis Homes strong and vital, and strategic planning, and I would suggest listening very carefully to those whom we serve, are a very important part of this. This planning that has been done in 2006 through 2008, and again now in 2014, has been instrumental in some of the changes these years. Planning in 2006 and 2008 set the stage for the South Campus expansion for the cottages and hybrid homes, and that expansion has been going well. When completed, probably by the end of 2015, will include 75 hybrid homes and 66 cottages, or 141 new homes. Now in 2014, the board and management team has again been working on planning for the future, listening carefully to residents, community members, business partners, church leaders, and others as we look to the future. 3 strategic directions have been established. First, to create a palette of integrated, seamless services that can be used to define the virtual aspect of the Landis Homes community, enhancing the tangible campus. Second, continuing to transform the campus to reflect 21st century expectations, anticipate utilization by residents, and support the palette of integrated seamless service. And third, to lay the resource foundation for the future for Landis Homes 2025, ensuring access to the financial, technological, human, and collaborative resources that will be needed to achieve the vision or portrait. This has led to a new campus plan, a new campus master plan, and a timeline. One of the things we heard from residents, prospective and current, from staff and many others, is the need for a new learning and wellness center. So one of the first steps is working on the preliminary design of the Learning and Wellness Center here in 2014. This will be followed likely by a capital campaign for learning and wellness, to be determined the exact timing by the board, but potentially projected to start in late 2014, early 2015. And construction of a learning and wellness center and other parts of campus could require the removal over a number of years, maybe 2, 3, 5 years in total, of up to 41 cottages in the central part of campus, as Ed had mentioned in attributing Ori Miller in his comments. This is a map of the current campus, and you can see on the top the north campus, and the lower part the south campus, showing some of the buildings either currently built or under construction. In addition to the cottages that are shown already constructed, there will also be an additional 7 cottages coming just below the far right or the east hybrid homes. As we look at the current campus, we note that we have 2 entrances from Oregon Road. We have heard a call to create a clear, obvious entry to campus for people who are not familiar with Landis Homes. Sometimes the current setting does not give a welcoming impression due to the large number of signs and multiple entrances. So one of our goals will be to create one main central entrance to our campus. Our West Campus is primarily residential living. It consists of some older building stock, with Harvest View being the newest at about 20 years old. Our swimming pool is 25 years old. This chapel here is about 30 years old. And while we have had requests for apartments with more than 1 bedroom, fewer than 20% of all of our apartments are more than 1 bedroom. That has been an issue. Looking at the East Campus, it includes some older construction in the personal care area, though in recent years it's been renovated. It also includes newer construction, including part of healthcare area, which is just over 10 years old. We have also experienced the need for additional rehabilitation space. In the center of campus, we have 41 cottages, most small and older buildings. Some of the cottages are about 500 square feet, and many do not have garages. As you can see, construction is also lower density compared to other cottage areas on campus. The proposed master plan then focuses on the area of campus along Oregon Road. And while it may be a little hard to see this on the wall, we do have copies of this plan that you can pick up on the table in the back and take with you if you're interested in this. This plan seeks to prepare us for the 21st century by addressing a number of key concerns. The concern of offering a clear main entrance to campus is addressed by creating a new entrance between the east and west entrances. This new entrance will offer a direct path to the center of campus and to the south campus as well. It's possible that the east entrance, where we have experienced flooding over the years, will be closed, and the west entrance could remain open but we would likely remove the entrance signs there, having entrance signs at the new central entrance. While a master plan offers a general blueprint of future direction, a significant amount of work lies ahead in terms of determining actual building footprint and identifying the interior design of the buildings. We would anticipate removing 19 of the smaller cottages in the next year and a half or so, another 15 then a few years out from that, and then another 7 later on, to make space for a building that would include a new learning and wellness center with new swimming pool, a village commons that could include pharmacy, store, and other space to serve all residents. The new buildings would also include new apartments, many of which would offer more than one bedroom, in a 1-bedroom and den or 2-bedroom layout, as well as offer more than one bath. Included in the building would be ground-level under-building parking and 3 floors, in most cases, above the parking. As you notice in the drawing, there would be a bridge in the building over the driveway that would come from the main entrance toward the south campus. And this would be one of the places potentially to enter the garage. There could be other garage parking entrances as well. Also, this plan would help us realize our dream for many years to connect the east and the west campus areas in a gathering area that will support our value of creating community for all residents. There would be an indoor connection between east and west. The new Learning and Wellness Center would be on the south side of the building, accessible to all residents. A group will be forming soon with direction by Linford Good and Eva Bering and others to begin planning for this new Learning and Wellness Center. And as shown, we would anticipate providing a green space to be right outside of the center. The campus master plan also identifies potential space to the east side of campus where additional hybrid homes could be built, though no timeline and the exact location of those homes has been established for the construction of those homes. As we move ahead with this plan, the view of campus by those driving along Oregon Road will change. One of the things we frequently hear from first-time visitors to the campus is that they had no idea as to what all Landis Homes offered after they came onto campus, or before they came onto campus, because it's difficult to see areas such as healthcare, Harvest View, and other areas of campus from along Oregon Road. The current view along Oregon Road is primarily of the backs of cottages. As we redevelop the center of campus and take a look from the perspective shown by the blue dot there and the perspective shown above, the view of campus would look more like this. There will be a clear main entrance and focal point to welcome visitors and guests. We will seek to maintain as many of the current trees in this area as possible, and we'll plant new trees as well. The goal of the current board and leadership of Landis Homes will be to continue in the tradition of good work done by our founders 50 years ago, and the board of directors and staff leadership over these past 50 years, as we continue to carry out our mission of serving aging adults and their families by seeking to honor and enrich their lives in a community of Christ-like love. We are grateful to our founders and to former and current board members for their significant work that was done over these years, guided by our values of joy, compassion, integrity, stewardship, and community. And for this, we thank you. We do now, as we wrap up our time together, want to share our appreciation with you. And one of the ways that we would like to do that is by providing each household gathered here today a copy of a book that is just freshly produced, hot off the presses last week, called Growing Community, 1994 to 2014. Also, we have a 50th anniversary video that is in DVD format that members of management team and other team members here are sharing with you. So this is one of the small tokens of appreciation which we wish to share with you. I would also mention that though this book covers our last 20 years, we are very grateful to A. Grace Wanger for her work, together with Deb Laws Landis on staff, who also worked on the most recent book, to produce a book called The First 30 Years, 1964 to 1994. Many of you have this book already, but if you do not have this book, we have a limited number of copies remaining in the first printing edition of this, and those copies of this book, if you would like to pick up a copy, are on the back table as you leave to the left, as you leave the auditorium. As I mentioned, there are a couple other things on that table. There's a drawing of the campus master plan, which you can pick up. And for those of you who may be history buffs, there's a few copies of this brochure. It's a photocopy of a brochure produced in 1963 by the Mission Board. It was produced by the Mission Board. 5,000 copies were printed and sent out through deacons throughout Lancaster Mennonite Conference to share what Landis Homes was going to be about. It's called Landis Homes, a community for older people, and it lists the address on Route 722 between Oregon and Nashville, Route 3, Lidditz, Pennsylvania, and the sponsor is Eastern Mennonite Board of Missions and Charities, Salunga, Pennsylvania. There's some very interesting tidbits of our early beginning in this, and you can feel free to pick up a copy of this on the way out as well. Our heartfelt thank you to each of you. That's all that we can say. Thank you.